My name is Charlotte Mather Taylor, and I'm the Executive Director of the Area Agency on Aging of Broward County. We are a nonprofit organization. We plan, develop, coordinate, and evaluate programs, provide services, fund services, and are the prime advocate for Broward County residents 60 years of age or older. This video is brought to you by our Dementia Care and Cure Initiative Task Force, also known as DCCI. The DCCI Task Force is part of the Florida Department of Elder Affairs statewide network of task forces committed to creating dementia caring communities throughout Florida. One of our goals is to increase education, awareness, and sensitivity regarding the needs of people living with dementia and their caregivers. We hope this video will provide you helpful information to assist you in caring for your loved one. If you have any questions regarding this video or are seeking resources, please feel free to reach out to one of the phone numbers behind me on the screen or our website at www.adrcbroward.org. Thank you.
My name is Tom Crum. I'm the neuropsychologist at the Memory Disorder Center at Broward Health North. And really, I wanted to talk about being able to help people manage behaviors and maybe emotional responses in difficult situations. Primarily, I think we're talking about dementia in this case. There's a little precursor I'd like to talk about, because one of the most important things to think about when we're dealing with behaviors and difficult behaviors is to recognize as caregivers we have power, and being able to manage that power and make our power greater is one of the greatest tools that we have. And whether that's using our resources, our friends, our family, our community resources, we need as much power as we possibly can. If we're going to think about people who are having difficulties in engaging in difficult behaviors, most of the time we talk about it in situations where the person is at a higher level of agitation, frustration, or how I usually talk about it is arousal. And recognizing that there's a certain limit of our arousal that's good for us, that works for us. If we're too high on that arousal, we're not going to be as effective. But also on the other side, if we're not as aroused as we need to be, we're also not going to be effective. Recognizing if we're, as a caregiver in that situation where our arousal is also way too high, we're going to be a lot less effective. We're going to be much more responsive, maybe reactive, and not have the same efficacy, the effectiveness that we would really like to have with our loved one. And also, if we're too tired, if we're too low arousal, we're also not going to be as effective. So recognizing our own state is probably going to be one of the most important aspects of being able to manage agitation and anger. The signs of hyperarousal, we can think about it in terms of, we can recognize them on ourselves. We're going to be much more reactive. We're going to be much more focused on the negative. We're going to really identify the things that are probably on the negative end of that. So if we're starting to do that, that's something that we need to be aware of for ourselves. The other thing is, when people are starting to become a little bit more agitated, frustrated, a lot of times we think about it as being a large thing that happens, that there's all of a sudden something happens. More than likely, it's been a million little things over the course of the day that's added up, so that at this point, whatever is causing them to have that reaction may just be the focal point, may just be the focus of it, rather than the actual cause. So there could have been a lot of different things that happen over the course of the day, such as, and these are real life examples, being too cold, being too hot, having to go to the bathroom for an extended period of time. All these things really add up to make somebody much more likely to react in a way that I guess we consider problematic. People that have difficulty communicating also are going to have a greater likelihood of responding in a behavioral way rather than being able to just talk about it. So with all this in mind, let's see, what are the things that we can do in order to improve our ability to manage behaviors? The first thing, and I think this is probably the most important, is really taking care of yourself. Caregivers need to be aware of, if they are focusing primarily on the person they're caring for, they're giving up their resources, they're sacrificing themselves for a good reason. but those resources aren't readily replenished. They take some work to get them back. The less resources you have, the more likely you are to have greater difficulty managing problematic behaviors. There's also environmental strategies that we can use, things that we can change just around us that can help us manage those behaviors much more effectively. Where the area where I always try to focus is the behavioral strategies, recognizing that we can do things, actively do things to help make behaviors less or more likely to occur. And if all else fails, or if the behaviors are so caustic and so difficult, we can, resort to medications to help manage some of the behaviors. The caregiver self-care, as I said, is probably the most important thing that I have to stress to everybody. Um, why? Caregivers are the most effective method of change. It, there is nobody in your loved one's life that can have that impact. There are 168 hours in a week, and you can have that impact every single moment you're with that person. That could be for the positive, or it could be for the negative. And that's one of the areas where we definitely do have more power. I'd like you to recognize that in many situations, we set up these anticipatory responses where we have this idea in our head. We have a script already made out. We know what's going to happen. And then we engage in the situation with that going to happen. And if we have that script already written out, we just made it happen. What I'd rather you do is take a step back and develop an alternative strategy, not have that anticipation for something bad happening. We can develop a plan so that something good happens. Now, changing the environment is something that's sometimes easy to do and sometimes more difficult depending upon what's going on. But if you have somebody that's withdrawn, isolated, depressed, we try to increase stimulation, try to increase intellectual stimulation, social interaction. If you have somebody that's agitated and is angry, we try to lower the stimulation, reduce the volume on TV, play some soft music, turn down the lights a little bit. If there's too many people in the room, we try to reduce the number of people in the room. If somebody is anxious and they're nervous, we try to distract them, try to find pleasant distractions, games, something to really stimulate their brain and engage their brain. One of the most important behavioral management strategies is developing a daily, weekly, monthly routine. And I cannot stress how important this is for everybody, but especially if there's issues that are problematic. Maintaining a very stable meal cycle, even if the person's not hungry, having a meal at breakfast, at lunch, and at dinner, or an afternoon snack, or afternoon tea, whatever it is, so that there's a stable meal schedule can be very helpful. Not only does it cut down on fluctuations in blood sugar, but it also is a very pleasant interaction that people can engage in. Want to have a restroom schedule as well. If somebody hasn't requested to use the restroom for a while, or they're not even thinking about it, suggest maybe we could use the restroom now. A lot of times I don't think we're always aware when we need to use the restroom, but our body is. It's definitely something that will increase our arousal or agitation. Especially if people are having more agitation or maybe confusion, sundowners in the evening, there are behavioral strategies to help manage that as well. Having sun in the morning turns our brain on. There's an area in our brain that actually is like a light switch. It says, okay, there's sun, it must be daytime. It sets our brain schedule. As our day goes on, we start to use up a lot of that energy. And as we start to get in the doldrums in the afternoon, in going out in the sun again, increasing exercise in the afternoon is a very helpful strategy to reduce and actually push back sundowners or that confusion, late afternoon confusion to a later time, hopefully post dinner. And always having a large calendar with important events readily available for people to refer to. I don't know how many times we ask questions of what am I supposed to be doing today? Where am I supposed to be? These are questions that could be readily answered with a large calendar. One of the most basic behavioral strategies or ways to think about behavior is extinction. And it's one of the most powerful tools that we have. If you what you're doing, if what your loved one is doing is increasing or staying, even if you think that you're punishing it or removing reinforcers, if that behavior is getting greater, you're reinforcing it somehow. So recognizing that if you are doing something, or if your loved one's doing something that you don't like and it's getting worse, somehow, no matter what you're doing, if even if the best intentions or the best strategies can turn around and reinforce themselves in ways that we really don't want them to. So one of the ways to do that is you can recognize if you stop reinforcing that behavior, there's a period where that the extinction curve gets very high. How to word that, where you have an increase of that negative behavior for a very short period of time. But if we stop reinforcing at that point, that behavior will tend to go away. And that's really where we want to have our behavioral strategies to work. We want to not reinforce the negative behaviors and really try to reinforce more of the positive behaviors. One of the biggest things and that I think is important for caregivers to think about, if what you're doing is not working, stop doing it. There's got to be an alternative strategy. There's got to be something else we can think of that will help us to do it a little bit differently. The example I always use, if what you're doing is not working, if sticking your finger up your nose would work better, there has to be something else that would work just as well or more effectively than what you're doing. It may be an indication to take a step back and try to identify, what am I doing? How am I doing it? What is reinforcing this behavior? Let me think of something else. And one of the things I've always tried to do is come up with the most ridiculous behavior I could think of in order to take my mind off that single track that it was on, to find something else. And we can be very creative, and we can come up with multiple, and in every situation that may work today, it may not work 5 minutes from now, it may not work tomorrow. So if we can have that flexibility, the ability to find alternative strategies, we're going to be much more effective at behavioral management. One of the things really to be aware of, and I think we talked about this beforehand, is that agitation, the anger, the anxiety is highly correlated with reduced ability to verbalize, to talk. So as people's verbal abilities or their awareness of what's going inside of them decreases, they're much more likely to become frustrated. Um, so being aware of that, if you see that frustration, it's a good cue to kind of take a step back and attempt to help with that communication. Don't talk for your loved one. Don't talk over them. Don't solve their problems, but really help them try to problem solve a solution. With that agitation management, one of the most effective verbal or visual analogies that I have is thinking of agitation as a river. Really, you can't control a river. You're not going to go in and stop a river, but you can swim with the river, and you can use that agitation and help direct that energy in an alternative direction. And many times, just with agitation, you're going to find that you're very, very wet way before you recognize that you were in a situation that was going to cause any sort of issue. So if you find that, again, it's a time to take a step back and try to find an alternative strategy. At any given time with agitation management, with behavioral management, you got to think about your own safety as well, and having a plan for yourself, an escape plan, support system to pull from. These are very important. These are ways of increasing your own resources and your own available uh, level of safety. Now, I have lists of agitation and behavioral management strategies, things that really would be helpful. Really trying to stay calm. And I think we can all relate to a situation where somebody comes in and they're very animated and agitated. It almost brings your own level of agitation up with them. If somebody is agitated, one of the most effective strategies is trying to keep yourself calm, lower your voice, make them try to listen to you, what you're saying. Try to keep your distance, open posture, If there's a lot of activity, if there's a lot of stimulation, we try to reduce that, try to make the situation as calm as we possibly can. Focus on, again, if they're having difficulty communicating, focus on the verbal statements that are going to be most helpful. I love you. Everything's going to be okay. I'm here for you. I'm going to help. If you know the person well enough, and touch is something that you feel comfortable with and they feel comfortable with, a very light touch on the arm or on the shoulder can be very calming for people. If you know the person really well, a hug can be an amazing strategy to help reduce uh, any sort of agitation. It works for me fairly well. Really focus on the positive things. One of the things I really want to stress is take the word no out of your vocabulary. You can't, I can't, no are going to be ineffective strategies at that time. What I really like to do is say, I absolutely understand that you want to do this. Let's figure out how we can do that. Or let's do it in this way. Or maybe we can figure out a way to do it that's a little bit different. But having that flexibility, and instead of stopping that person, instead of pushing them, we're pulling. We're really trying to use that energy that they have for the good. The things that you really don't want to do, threaten or demand, not going to work to somebody who's in a state where they're a little bit upset. It probably wouldn't work for me or work for you as well. Um, Try to really have that open posture, not physically threatening posture. And one of the things, and this is a hard one for a lot of people, don't make threats that you can't absolutely follow through with. And don't make promises that you can't follow through with. These are sets up an unrealistic situation where you're likely going to have that come back around on you. So try to think about what are strategies that will work, how it's going to work in this situation, and pull for that. And if all else fails, and this is a strategy I use often with humor, I honestly, humor is one of the ways I distract people often, is distraction. If you can take somebody and direct that energy in a completely different way, where if it's something positive, something pleasant, something that they love to do, something that they love to talk about, it's going to be a much more effective strategy. You can take that energy they have, that agitation, and put it into laughter. Works really, really well. Looking at pictures of it's something in the past that was funny or a pleasant occasion. These are all strategies that can work very effectively, very quickly, and be very pleasant. If all else fails, or if the behaviors are so difficult to manage or caustic, medications can be very helpful. Um, Unfortunately, some of the medications take a lot longer to work than we would really like to. Like the SSRIs, the SNRIs may take weeks to really work. But what they do is they kind of reduce the pressure that the person's feeling. So if we can reduce that pressure, that anxiety, that overall sense of that power, then we can make life much more pleasant and much less unpleasant. And so those medications may be very helpful. Benzodiazepines may work temporarily for some people, but they're not usually recommended for people with memory problems at all. One, because they can cause memory problems all on their own. They can cause tolerance, be habituating, and they're not usually the primary medication that people would use, although they are, I think, one of the primary meds that we think about when we want to take down somebody's anxiety or their anger. Some of the anti-agitation medications can be very helpful. Seroquel works really well for some people. It's a low side effect profile for most people, and it's not all that sedating, but it can uh, maybe take a little bit of the edge off. There are some atypical antipsychotics that are used at very low dosages that don't have the side effects and can be, especially for very highly aroused, highly agitated people, can be very helpful. For people that aren't sleeping, they're also, sleep is one of the most important things we do. It helps build our resources back up. And I think we can all agree if we're tired, we're probably grumpy. So if we can help maintain that sleep wake cycle, one of the probably the most important strategies that we can do for anybody to help behavioral management. Benadryl is a very dangerous drug for many people with memory problems. Uh, One of the things that Alzheimer's disease specifically is it cuts out acetylcholine in the brain, and Benadryl also does the same thing. So you have a huge deficit of acetylcholine, which can cause delirium. It can really cause some serious problems for people with memory problems. So there are other medications that they use to help people sleep. If they're unable to sleep or they're that the sundowners, the agitation increases at night, um, Ambien or Zolpidem is not typically recommended because of, again, the memory impacting problems. But there are some other medications that can work fairly well. So in general, in summary, we can have emotional issues. And I think if we're dealing with stress, we're dealing with quite a few emotional issues. We can talk about guilt, we can talk about grief, sadness. We have our own things that we're dealing with at the same time we're trying to help our loved one through a difficult time. Often issues with the brain make emotional problems much worse. And we talk about not just with the language problems, but with the ability to control the impulses and be aware of the impact of the behaviors that we're going to engage in. But as caregivers, we are the most effective method of change. That is, there's no better method of helping your loved one get through a situation than a caregiver with a bag of tricks. And really the most important thing I can talk about is that paradigm shift with, recognizing that I am powerful, I can do this, I just need some help.
We hope you have found this video educational. Remember, you are not alone, and there are many resources out there to help you. The next slide lists some very important resources that you can connect to seek additional assistance. In addition, remember the Area Agency on Aging of Broward County is here to help. Our phone number, which is behind my screen, is 954-745-9779, which is our direct helpline, as well as our website, www.adrcbroward.org. Wherever you live in the state, you can reach out to also the 1-800 number also behind me on the screen. That's 1-800-963-5337. That number will connect you to an area agency on aging in your area. Thank you.